Montana Territory, August 1882. By the time the train hissed to a halt in the dust-choked station of Red Willow, Xavier Ashford had already decided he wanted nothing to do with her. She would be just another complication. That was what he told himself as he stood with his boots planted firm on the splintered platform arms crossed over his chest, watching the plume of steam rise into the pale sky. He had not asked for a wife. He had not written any letters. It had been his sister Clara who had sent them behind his back, desperate for him to stop living like a ghost on his cattle ranch since the war had ended. Xavier had buried enough in his lifetime. He did not need some wide-eyed woman stepping off the train, thinking she could fix him. But then he saw her. Her hat was crooked from the wind, and dust clung to the hem of her dark traveling dress. She stepped down slowly, one gloved hand gripping the rail, the other clutching a worn satchel. Her name was Odessa Hartley. He knew that much from the letter Clara had waved at him like a winning hand. Odessa was 23 from Pennsylvania and had no family left. Her eyes scanned the platform, searching, hopeful. Then they dropped. She pressed her lips tight and looked down at her boots, and Xavier saw the tear, just one sliding down her cheek before she swiped it away, quick. He felt it like a hook in his chest. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, and before he could think better of it, he was moving. Odessa startled when he stopped in front of her. "Miss Hartley?" he asked. She looked up and her eyes were greener than he expected. Tired, red-rimmed, but steady. "Yes." "Are you Mr. Ashford?" "I am." He should have told her the truth right there, that he never meant for her to come. But something in her face stopped him. That tear. The fact that she had not cried more. She was holding herself together like a barn patched with old nails and prayer. "I am sorry," she said quickly, her voice soft but clear. "I know this may not be what you wanted. I can find work in town until I can afford." "You will come with me," he said, cutting her off. "You came all this way. I will not have you sleeping in some saloon room." She blinked. "Truly, I have a wagon waiting." He reached for her satchel. She hesitated, then let him take it. It was heavier than it looked. They rode in silence, at first the wagon creaking along the narrow trail out of town. The sun baked the hills golden. Odessa sat with her hands folded in her lap, spine straight, but Xavier could see her jaw was clenched tight. "You have family?" he asked. She shook her head once. "None left. My father died 3 winters ago. My mother before that. The man I was promised to married another before I returned from caring for my father. I suppose that made me someone else's problem to solve." He glanced at her. "You were no one's problem." Odessa looked at him, then really looked. "Your sister said you needed someone. She was wrong." She turned back toward the trail. "So was I." They said nothing more until the ranch came into view. The house was 2 stories simple but strong, with a wraparound porch and a view of the valley that went on for miles. The barn leaned a little, but the fences were solid. A windmill groaned in the breeze. Odessa stared at it all, blinking slow. "It is beautiful." Xavier did not answer. Instead, he helped her down from the wagon, carried the satchel inside, and pointed down the hall. "You can take the room at the end. I will sleep in the attic. You will be safe here." Odessa's hand fluttered over her skirt. "Thank you. I will show you the land tomorrow. You can decide then if you want to stay. I already decided on the train," she said quietly. "But I will see it anyway." That night, Odessa sat at the kitchen table with a plate of beans and cornbread barely touched. Xavier watched her from across the room while he cleaned his rifle. She was not fragile. He could see that now. She was tired but built from something solid. "You fought in the war?" she asked suddenly. He looked up. "Yes. Did you lose people?" Yes, she nodded. Me too. That was all they said. By the second day, he showed her the land. She walked beside him through sun-dried fields and across the stream that split the east pasture. She asked questions about the cattle, the soil, the weather patterns. Not once did she ask where she might fit into it all. But when he turned back toward the house, she followed. By the fourth day, she had repaired 2 shirts, fed the chickens, and started a vegetable garden behind the kitchen. By the 6th, she was laughing with Clara over coffee while Xavier watched from the porch. By the 7th, she found the grave behind the barn. He saw her standing over it at sunset arms, folded eyes wet again. She did not ask whose it was. She just stood there. "It was my wife," Xavier said, voice low. Odessa turned, startled. "I did not mean to pry. You were not." He stepped beside her. "She died 6 years ago. Fever took her and our son." Odessa looked down at the grave. "I am sorry. I did not want another wife," he said. "Not because of you, just because it hurts." She nodded slow. "I did not want to be someone's second choice. You are not." Their eyes met. Odessa stepped closer. "Xavier," she whispered, voice trembling. "I am not asking you to forget. But I came here with nothing but hope. I do not want to lose that too." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "I do not want to lose you either," he said. And she smiled, real and soft. That night, Odessa stayed in the kitchen long after Clara left. She dried the dishes while Xavier stacked firewood. Their hands brushed once. Then again. She did not pull away. "You still want to leave?" he asked. "No," she said, turning to face him. "I want to stay." His eyes searched hers. "You sure?" "Yes," she said. "I came here looking for a place to belong. I think I found it." He stepped closer. "I never wanted a mail-order bride. I never wanted to be one," she said, her voice trembling. "But I am glad you came." "So am I." And when he kissed her, it was careful and warm, like something finally falling into place. The chickens had torn up half the lettuce sprouts by morning. Odessa knelt in the dirt in her plain cotton dress sleeves, rolled jaw tight as she replanted what she could. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet, and the grass was still damp with dew. She didn't speak when she heard Xavier's boots behind her, only brushed the soil back around a fragile stem and pressed it gently down. "You could fence it in," he said, after a moment, his voice quiet. "I plan to," she replied, brushing her hands on her apron. "But there's only so much wire, and I wasn't sure what you'd need it for first." He crouched beside her. "Wire's yours if you want it. I'll use wood for the back pasture. We've got a few lengths left from the lean-to I tore down last spring." Odessa looked sideways at him. "You'd give it up that easy." Xavier picked up a broken sprig of lettuce, turning it between his fingers. "You're part of this place now. What's here belongs to both of us." She studied him. "You say that like it's simple." "It can be." Odessa didn't answer. Instead, she stood, dusted her skirt, and turned toward the barn. Xavier followed, neither of them speaking, as they passed the trough where 2 calves sloshed their noses in leftover water. The barn door stuck a little from the rain 2 nights ago, and she leaned her shoulder into it until it gave. Inside the dim, cedar-scented space, she crossed to the far wall where she'd seen the wire coiled days before. She tested its weight with both hands. "Let me carry it," Xavier said. "I'm not made of glass. I didn't say you were." Still, she let him lift it, and they took it out together, stepping around a rusted plow half swallowed by grass. Odessa walked ahead, measuring distance with her eyes, then drove a stake into the ground with a rock. She didn't ask him to help, but he handed her another stake without a word. By midday, the fence was half formed, and her palms were raw. They sat beneath the kitchen window to catch the breeze, Odessa sipping cool water from a tin cup, while Xavier leaned his back against the wall. "You work harder than most men I've known," he said. "I didn't come here to sit idle." He glanced over. "You ever think about going back?" "No," she said. "There's nothing left east of the Mississippi I care to see again." He shifted, resting his arms on his knees. "You don't talk much about what you left behind. That's because I don't miss it." She didn't expect him to ask more, but he did. "What did you love?" Once Odessa set the cup down on the windowsill. "Books, music. I played the piano for it before my father sold it to pay the doctor." "Did you hate him for that?" "No," she said. "It got him 4 extra months. I'd have sold my hands for that." Xavier looked at her long and steady, but didn't speak. She didn't need him to. The silence between them had started to feel less like absence and more like understanding. She rose, brushing straw from her skirt. "I'll finish the fence before supper. I'll bring the hammer," he said, pushing to his feet. Later, the sun dipped low and lit the valley in bronze. The fence stood finished, the garden safe. Odessa sat on the porch steps, pulling thorns from her hem, while Xavier smoked beside her, the scent of tobacco curling slow in the air. "I thought I'd feel like a stranger here longer," she said. "You're not a stranger." She looked at him, cautious hope flickering in her eyes. "Then what am I?" He turned his head toward her. "Hard to say yet, but I know I don't want you to leave. I wasn't planning to." He nodded, then tapped the ash from his cigarette. "You got a favorite flower, phlox?" she said, surprising herself. "It grew wild behind our old church. Pale purple. Smelled like honey warmed in the sun. I'll see if I can find some seed for you." She smiled and tucked her knees up under her chin. "No one's ever planted anything for me before." Xavier didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You've planted a lot for me already." They sat there until the stars came out quiet, both of them leaning just a little closer than before. It rained the day Odessa found the ledger. The barn roof sang with it, steady and thin, like a needle stitching sky to earth. She was looking for an oil lamp in the storage loft, picking her way through crates of rusted tack and forgotten tools, when she saw the corner of it wedged beneath a heap of burlap sacks. Bound in cracked leather, the book was heavier than it looked, and when she opened it, the pages smelled of dust and smoke. Inside were columns of names, numbers, and notations scrawled in Xavier's tight hand. Calf counts, feed quantities, weather notes. But then toward the back, another kind of entry. Short lines, dates, some crossed out, others underlined. She ran her finger under one that read simply, January 3rd. Levi coughed through the night. Didn't wake come morning. She closed the book carefully and stood still for a long while, her breath quiet in the dim space. She didn't read further. She didn't need to. When she came down the ladder, the rain had eased to a mist. The hills wore it like a veil, and the horses stood still in the distance, their backs darkened by damp. Xavier was at the workbench outside the smokehouse, sharpening the edge of a side with long practiced strokes. He glanced up when he heard her boots. "You go looking for something?" he asked, nodding toward the barn. "Lamp oil," she said. "But I found something else." He set the blade down and wiped his hands with a cloth. "I figured I'd lost that ledger." She didn't hand it back. Instead, she kept her fingers around it, thumb pressed against the spine. "You kept his name," she said. Xavier didn't speak for a moment. "Then I couldn't say it out loud for a long time. Writing it helped some." She stepped closer, the book still in her hands. "You don't need to explain." "I know," he said. "But I want to." She waited. "I told myself I'd bury it with them," he said. The want of anything else. The years kept rolling, and the quiet got easier to live in. Then Clara sent those letters without asking. Odessa looked down at the warped leather in her palms, and I stepped off that train. He met her eyes, and I saw someone who knew what it was to keep going with empty hands. She held the ledger out to him. "I think this belongs inside," she said. He took it, fingers brushing hers. "Thank you." They walked back together under the soft gray sky. The house glowed faintly with lamplight from the kitchen window. Inside, she hung her shawl near the stove and began slicing potatoes, while Xavier set the ledger on the shelf above the hearth. "You ever keep a journal?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Once," she said, "when I was 14, I stopped after my mother died. It felt foolish writing things no one would ever read." "I'd read them," he said. She looked up from the knife, surprised. "Why?" "Because I want to know the parts of you you don't say out loud." She turned back to the board. "Maybe one day I'll write them again." The stew simmered slow while the rain deepened. Odessa stirred it with one hand, the other resting lightly on the edge of the table. Xavier watched her without speaking, his gaze steady but unintrusive. There was something in it that made her chest ache, not with sorrow, but with a strange tentative shape of hope. When they sat down to eat, he paused before lifting his spoon. "You've changed things," he said. "I've only cooked a few meals and mended some shirts." "That ain't what I meant." She looked at him across the table. "Then say what you meant." He didn't look away. "The house feels full again." Odessa folded her hands in her lap and nodded once. "It does." That night, she lit the lamp she'd been searching for earlier and placed it on the windowsill in her room. Wind moved across the grass outside and the eaves creaked softly. She sat at the small desk Clara had helped her clean days ago and opened a blank sheet of paper. She dipped the pen and in a careful hand wrote, "August 10th, he remembered his son's name and trusted me with it." She folded the paper in half and tucked it beneath the drawer. Then she blew out the lamp and lay down, the hush of the prairie pressing gentle against the walls. In the dark, Odessa felt it for the first time, not just the safety of the place, but belonging. Not as a visitor, not as a wife by arrangement, but as someone seen. And in the house beyond her door, Xavier sat beside the hearth, ledger unopened, watching the fire burn low, knowing she hadn't run, knowing she'd stay. The first frost came early that year. Xavier found Odessa in the root cellar before sunrise, bent low over a crate of turnips, breath clouding in the lantern glow. Her braid hung down her back damp from the cold seep threading through the earth-packed walls. She didn't flinch when he stepped down beside her, only shifted to make room. "I thought I'd pull the last of the beans today," she said, voice even. "If the ground freezes solid, they'll spoil under the soil." "I'll set the plow aside," he said. "We'll both go." She nodded once and lifted the crate between them. No wasted movement, no fuss, just two people bracing for winter side by side. By midday, their hands were stained with soil and the garden lay bare rows of stubble where life had been. Odessa wrapped her shawl tighter, eyes scanning the sky. "It's early for snow," she said. "Too early," Xavier agreed. "But it's coming." She looked toward the hills. "We'll need to smoke the rest of the meat soon, and I can start canning what's left of the apples. I'll bring in more wood." She paused, then lifted her gaze to his. "Have you ever had someone here through winter since?" "No," he said. "You'd be the first." That night she stitched while he read from a worn book of sermons neither of them believed in, but found comfort in nonetheless. The fire snapped low. Wind brushed the windows. She didn't ask where he'd gotten the scar down his forearm, the one that caught the light when he turned pages. And he didn't ask about the small faded ring she wore on a chain beneath her collar. Instead, she said the cellar's drying out. "We'll need to lay straw under the crates," He nodded. I'll check the rafters tomorrow. If the shingles shift, even one will get leaks. Odessa set her sewing aside. You ever think about building something new? Adding on, he looked toward the kitchen wall. I have. She waited. I thought about a nursery once, Xavier said when she was still alive. Never finished the frame. Odessa didn't move. You still have the plans? They're somewhere in the desk. She rose quietly and crossed to the hearth, warming her hands. I'd like to see them. Xavier set the book down and joined her. Neither spoke for a long while. You're not afraid of the cold? He said finally. I've been through worse, she replied. He studied her profile the way the fire lit her cheek. You're not what I expected. I never asked to be anyone's expectation. He stepped closer, hand brushing the back of her wrist. You're more. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. You don't have to say that. I want to. She turned to face him. Then show me. He leaned in slow. The kiss was quiet, steady, without hunger or hesitation. Just a meeting of truths too long held in silence. Later, she stood at the door to her room, hand on the frame. I won't leave, she said. I won't let you, he replied. And when she closed the door behind her, her heart was no longer waiting for permission to belong. It already did. The wind shifted west and brought with it the scent of pine smoke from the buttes, a sign that someone farther out was burning sapwood clean through the morning. Odessa stood at the window, hands wrapped around a mug of steeped mint leaves from her own drying rack, watching frost melt off the railings. The air no longer bit sharp, but the cold clung low to the earth, stubborn and waiting. Behind her, Xavier folded the last of the blanket rolls and secured the cedar chest with its leather strap. She heard the soft click and the scrape of his boots as he stood. They sent word from Bozeman, he said. The county clerk's riding circuit again. He'll be through Red Willow next week. Odessa turned. You mean the marriage clerk? Xavier nodded, quiet. She set the mug down. You don't have to. I want to, he said before she could finish. Not because folks might talk, not because of some letter Clara sent. Because I've had your name in my mind every morning I wake up, and I want it spoken beside mine properly. Odessa's throat tightened. She reached for the edge of the table. All right, she said. If we're doing this, I want it done in that valley east of the ridge. The one with the cottonwoods. He smiled, small and sure. Then that's where we'll stand. The following days passed with quiet preparation. Clara arrived with a bundle of muslin she'd saved. And together, they shaped it into a simple gown Odessa could wear over her winter petticoats. Xavier didn't ask for details. He spent his time hauling cedar branches and clearing the trail toward the grove, the same one where Odessa had once pointed out the dipping flight of a hawk. On the morning of the clerk's arrival, frost still clung to the north-facing slopes, but the sun broke strong over the hills. Odessa wore her hair pinned with a single silver comb, the one her mother had given her before the fever came. Xavier waited beside the cottonwoods, his coat-brushed, boots polished, and a new iron buckle cinched at his waist. The clerk was a quiet man with a tired pony, and he read the vows steady, the corners of his paper lifting in the breeze. When it came time, Xavier took her hands, rough fingers folding over hers with care. I haven't always known what to say, he said, voice low. But I've known what not to lose. You're that. Odessa's voice trembled once, but held. I came here hoping for a place to land, and I found a home. Not the house, not the land, but you. I won't leave it. They signed the paper on the stump of a fallen cottonwood. The clerk tipped his hat and rode off before the sun had reached its peak, leaving them in the hush of the grove, breath misting in the air. That night, Odessa stood at the stove sleeves rolled back, stirring a pot of wild rice and bone broth, while Xavier fitted a new hinge to the pantry door. The house felt different, not fuller, not louder. just steadier somehow, like it had taken a long breath and settled into itself. After supper, they stepped out onto the porch. The sky above them was velvet dark and dusted with stars. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Xavier slid his hand into hers, and Odessa leaned against his shoulder, the top of her head fitting beneath his jaw. "You ever think of leaving again?" he asked after a while. "I used to think I would," she said. "Now I think about planting plum trees come spring." He nodded slowly. "We'll need to fence them in. Deer'll strip and bear otherwise. I figured we'd do it together." Xavier squeezed her hand. "We will." And they did. The seasons turned slow but sure. Snow came hard that winter, but so did warmth. Odessa stitched curtains from old flour sacks and filled the shelves with jars of pickled beetroot and dried apples. Xavier built the nursery frame with his own hands, sealing each beam with pine tar and care. When spring softened the earth, Odessa planted phlox along the southern slope, the kind she remembered from her childhood. They came up pale and sweet, and Xavier brought her the first bloom himself. By the time the next autumn rolled in, the house had changed again. The attic became a quiet place for books and old tools. The root cellar was lined with cedar shelves, and the nursery held a cradle Xavier had carved from a fallen elm. They named the boy Levi after the name Xavier had once written, but never spoken aloud until Odessa came. His eyes were dark like his father's, but he had Odessa's calm, steady, watchful, full of quiet knowing. One evening, as the boy slept swaddled in a quilt Clara had pieced together from spare cloth, Odessa and Xavier sat on the porch once more, the last light stretching long across the fields. "Do you remember the night I arrived?" she asked softly. "I remember everything about it," he said. "I thought I'd made a mistake. I didn't." She looked out over the land. "I never told you, but when I first saw this place, I imagined what it might sound like, full of life. Not loud, just lived in." And now she turned to him, eyes warm. "Now it sounds like home." He reached for her hand again, and she let him. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of earth, the hush of dusk, and the warmth of the man beside her, Odessa knew she had never been more certain of anything. They lived long, and they lived well through lean winters and green springs, through laughter and days spent in sweat and effort. But they never grew apart. Not once. And when the time came to tell Levi how they'd met, they told him the truth. That sometimes, even after great sorrow, two people can find each other in the quiet, build something real from what's left and never let it go.